In the southern part of Africa, on the edge of the vast Kalahari Desert, lies Bushman's Hole, one of the strangest places on Earth. At first glance, it looks like a small moss-covered pool at the base of a cliff, but in reality, it's a freshwater cave plunging 282 meters deep. Following recent expeditions, it still ranks as the third deepest known freshwater cave in the world. At the top, a narrow opening widens about 20 meters down, expanding into a near vertical cylinder roughly 122 meters across. Inside this otherworldly place, any mistake can be fatal, just like drifting in the cold, unforgiving void of space. Only 6 people have ever managed to descend safely past 250 meters, and one of them was David Shaw. When David dove deeper than almost anyone had before, he discovered the body of a young diver who had vanished there a decade earlier. What happened when he returned to bring that body back is both unbelievable and tragic. To witness what truly occurred on that fateful day, we dive beneath the African desert into the mysterious underwater cave known as Bushman's Hole. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to like the video. And if you haven't yet, please subscribe to our channel. This cave, called Bozeman's Gut by locals, challenges even the most fearless divers. And it was this sense of danger that drew a 20-year-old cave diver named Deon Dreyer here in 1994. Driven by the thrill of exploration, Deon joined an expedition organized by experienced diver Nuno Gomes to explore roughly half the cave's estimated depth. By then, he had completed around 200 dives. His mother begged him not to go. But like many divers, Deon carried that unique, almost reckless confidence that flirts with death. He couldn't resist the call. On December 17, 1994, he joined the group for a test dive. When the dive ended and the others surfaced, Deon was missing, and he never came back. No one knew exactly what had happened to him, but the most likely cause was a deep water blackout triggered by a buildup of carbon dioxide deep below. Although Deon was confirmed dead, nothing remained of him except his helmet. For years, many recovery attempts were made, but all failed. Eventually, his family accepted that he was simply too deep to retrieve, and they placed a memorial plaque at the cave's entrance in his memory. Even after Deon's death, Bushman's Hole continued to attract some of the world's most skilled cave divers. Among them, a man named David Shaw. David, a commercial airline pilot by profession, was introduced to diving by his son. After several shipwreck dives, he decided to explore cave diving, believing it was a challenge worth mastering. Over time, he dove across the globe, setting multiple world records. 10 years after Deon's tragic accident, in October 2004, David and his highly skilled diving partner Don Shirley arrived at the site, planning a deep exploration of the hole. When they entered the water, Don remained above as a safety diver, while David continued his descent into the abyss. Within minutes, he reached the cave floor, and as his light swept across the silt-covered bottom, something caught his eye. About 15 meters to his left, illuminated by his torch, lay a human body. As he swam closer, David realized it was Deon Dreyer, the young diver who had disappeared a decade earlier. But Deon's body had been trapped for years, buried in layers of mud and sediment. Breathing heavily and already a minute beyond his planned bottom time, David tried to free the body and lift it toward the surface, but it wouldn't budge. Knowing he couldn't stay longer, he attached a cave reel line to Deon's tanks so the body could be located later, and then began his slow ascent toward the surface. After nearly 10 hours underwater, both David and Don resurfaced safely. They soon contacted Deon's family to tell them the incredible news that their son's body had been found, and promised to return to bring him back. If successful, the mission would become the deepest body recovery dive in history. That same dive, descending to 270 meters, would also crown David Shaw as one of the world's most extreme and daring divers. But before we follow him into that final descent, it's important to understand the dangers of diving to such unimaginable depths. For every 10 meters a diver descends, the pressure and risks double. At extreme depths, divers can experience nitrogen narcosis, a state often called the rapture of the deep, which makes the diver feel suddenly intoxicated, clouding judgment and motor control. Another major risk is decompression sickness, known as the bends. Ascending too quickly prevents the gases in the body from decompressing safely, causing gas bubbles to form in the bloodstream, a life-threatening condition that can lead to paralysis or death. That's why deep divers must pause periodically on their way up, allowing time for their bodies to adjust before reaching the surface. In normal open-water recreational dives, divers use what's called an open-circuit system. You inhale air from your tank through the regulator, and when you exhale, the used gas escapes into the surrounding water as bubbles. Depending on your depth and breathing control, a single air tank can last anywhere from 30 to 60 minutes. But in a cave as deep as Bushman's Hole, even the best divers are on borrowed time. A typical dive like this would normally last about an hour, but David and Deon decided to use a closed-circuit rebreather system for this mission. This system recycles part of the breathing gas using a special rebreather unit that allows the diver to reuse exhaled air after it's filtered and refreshed with oxygen. When you inhale, the gas moves from the tank to your mouthpiece just like a standard regulator. But when you exhale, instead of releasing the gas into the water as bubbles, it's redirected back into the system, where carbon dioxide is removed and the remaining gas is recycled for reuse. Because of this recycling process, closed-circuit divers can stay underwater much longer than open-circuit divers. This was the key technology that allowed David and Deon to attempt such an insanely long and deep dive. Even so, they still needed to carry 6 tanks each, despite the rebreather system. As Deon's death had already proven, the real challenge wasn't diving deep. It was coming back alive. In the weeks following the discovery of Deon's body, preparations accelerated. An extensive plan was created. Different divers would be stationed at different depths, each assigned specific roles during the ascent and descent. They conducted full dress rehearsals, placed oxygen tanks along the descent route, and even installed a winch system on the cliffs to hoist the body once it reached the decompression chamber. A diving physiologist was brought in for medical emergencies, and forensic experts predicted that after 10 years underwater, the remains would likely be mostly skeletal. So, a special drawstring recovery bag was designed to safely contain what was left. According to the plan, once underwater, David would descend first to the bottom. He would cut Deon's body free from the entangled dive gear, place it carefully inside the bag, and then begin bringing it up to around 220 meters, where Deon would take over. From there, the body would be passed from one diver to another in a carefully coordinated relay, inching closer to the surface. Taking into account all the decompression stops, the entire operation was expected to last about 12 hours. The official date was set, January 8, 2005. The night before the dive, David, Deon, and the support team gathered for a final meeting. Calmly but firmly, David looked around at the team and said,
I really must emphasize that the most important person on the dive is you. Okay? It's not me. For me, the most important on the dive is me. Okay? You must look after yourselves. If you have a problem, you deal with your problem and forget about me. It cannot be any other way, okay? It's better to have one person dead than 2. Okay? It's as simple as that.
Yeah.
Simple as that. Okay?
If Dave doesn't make it, if I don't make it, we stay there. That's the end of the story.
Yeah, that's a given.
End of the story. We don't want to be recovered.
It's not an issue.
By the time of this historic dive, only 6 people in the world besides David had ever successfully descended below 250 meters. But no one had ever attempted a body recovery at such a depth. It was a mission so dangerous that even one small error could mean instant death. Still, on that morning, David Shaw descended into Bushman's Hole, determined to bring Deon Dreyer home. He began his dive calmly, sinking through the cold, crystal-clear darkness, descending meter by meter toward the bottom. After about 13 minutes, he reached the cave floor and began his recovery operation. Roughly at the same time, Deon Shirley followed, starting his descent toward their planned rendezvous point at 220 meters. But when Deon reached 152 meters, he realized something was wrong. He could see through the crystal-clear water, but everything below was eerily still. There were no rising bubbles, no movement, nothing to suggest that David had begun ascending. If the plan had gone smoothly, David should have already been on his way up. At such depths, there's no room for panic. Deon tried to stay composed, but deep down, he knew if a diver was motionless at this depth, it almost always meant they were already gone. Before the dive, David had made Deon promise not to risk his life trying to save him. He had said, "If I get into trouble, don't come for me." But Deon, torn between duty and friendship, couldn't leave without trying. He decided to push deeper than he ever had before, descending all the way to 254 meters. Then, suddenly, he heard a loud explosion. The oxygen control unit on his left arm had ruptured under the immense pressure. Without that critical device, he could no longer automatically regulate his oxygen levels. He now had to manually adjust the mixture, a full-time task that demanded total focus. It also meant he couldn't risk going deeper to look for David. By now he was certain his friend was gone. At that depth, they were breathing a trimix blend, a precise combination of helium, nitrogen, and oxygen. The balance had to be exact. A tiny deviation could be fatal. As Deon began his ascent, an oxygen overload hit him, making him dizzy and disoriented. Then, a helium bubble entered his inner ear, throwing off his balance completely. He began spinning, up and down, side to side, losing all sense of direction. In the chaos, he lost hold of his guide rope, the only lifeline leading back to safety. That rope was the only path Deon had to find his way out of the cave. Somehow, before drifting into the void, he managed to grab it again. But by then, he was in excruciating pain, overcome with nausea. He began vomiting underwater, a deadly situation for any diver. Eventually, he regained some balance and slowly ascended until he met one of the support divers. Using a waterproof communication slate, he wrote the words, "David will not return." The message was quickly taken to the surface. When it reached the team and Deon's family, there was nothing left but grief and silence. Their son would remain forever in the depths of Bushman's Hole, and now the man who had tried to bring him home would rest there beside him. After 12.5 hours underwater, Deon was lifted out of the water using a winch and placed inside a decompression chamber. He survived, but the dive left him with permanent inner ear damage, affecting his balance for the rest of his life. Despite every safety measure, David never made it out. The tragedy shocked everyone. The team abandoned their equipment and left in despair. A few days later, a small memorial service was held by the water for David. When divers went down once more to retrieve the remaining gear, they found something unexpected at a depth of 30 meters beneath the cave's ceiling. The bodies of both David and Deon side by side. Apparently, when the recovery line had been pulled upward, it had dislodged them from the mud below, bringing them both gently toward the top of the cave. In the end, David kept his promise. He had brought Deon home, even though it cost him his life. But soon after, the truth of his final moments came to light. The camera mounted on his helmet had captured everything: his last dive, his last breath, his final struggle. The footage begins with David entering the pitch-black void. He reaches the bottom, locates Deon's body, and begins working to free it. He removes the recovery bag and starts pulling it over the body's legs. But as he moves, his fin stirs up a cloud of silt, blinding him for several seconds. When the water clears, Deon's headless, preserved body begins to drift eerily upright, as if floating on its own. The body hadn't decayed. The cold, oxygen-deprived depths had mummified it, keeping it intact. This made the job unexpectedly harder. A floating body is much more difficult to bag than one pinned to the floor. David's breathing grows heavy. Deep, strained exhales. He grunts, fumbles, and keeps working, determined to finish. He places his flashlight on the cave floor to free both hands and continues trying to secure the bag. After about 2 minutes, His movements become slower and confused. By the third minute, he pulls out scissors and begins cutting away Deon's old gear. But by then, nitrogen narcosis, the deep water drunkenness, had fully set in. He started losing focus, staggering slightly in the sloped cave floor. After about 5.5 minutes, he finally seems to realize it's time to leave, but it's too late. His light cables had become tangled around Deon's tanks and the guide line. He tried to free himself, twisting and turning, but each breath grew weaker and more desperate. Unknowingly, he had entangled himself with the very body he was trying to rescue. Still clutching his scissors, he tried to cut himself free, but couldn't. He struggled toward the recovery line, pulling Deon's body with him, but his lungs were already filled with carbon dioxide. At 21 minutes into the dive, David Shaw stopped moving. In that moment, the dark cave claimed its second diver. 10 days later, after both bodies were recovered, Deon's parents came to see their son for the first time in 10 years. They didn't know what to expect, but when they saw his fully preserved body, they felt a strange sense of peace. Though Deon's head was missing, his form was unmistakable. They believed David had given them back their son. Deon's mother, Anna, said she hoped her husband could rest knowing their boy had finally been found. When David's own body was later recovered, his ashes were scattered over his beloved South Africa. In the end, David Shaw performed an act of extraordinary courage, a dive that combined skill, devotion, and sacrifice in equal measure. His story, like Deon's, remains one of the most haunting and heroic tragedies in diving history. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next story.